Alright, shalom everyone. Today we're going to be looking at the black Hebrew Israelite argument that the white man is the descendant of Esau, or Edom, that is, the brother of Jacob, also known as Yaakov, who later became Israel, the child of Yitzhak, who was the child of Abraham, who is the lineage of the promises of Elohim. I made a few notes here that I'm going to walk through or go through step by step. And let's start here with Esau being hairy and red and ruddy. Let's go to scripture. Let's look at some of the scriptures that the black Hebrew Israelites bring up concerning this doctrine of theirs. I believe the first time we see this is in Bereshith, that is Genesis, chapter 25, around in verse 30. Let's see. Okay, now we'll start back here at verse 21. And Yitzhak prayed to Yahuwah for his wife, because she was barren. And Yahuwah answered his prayer, and Ribkah his wife conceived. And within her the children struggled together. And she said, If all is right, why am I this way? So she went to ask Yahuwah. And Yahuwah said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples shall be separated from your body. And 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older serve the younger. And when the days were filled for her to give birth, and see, twins were in her womb. And the first came out, red all over, and hairy like a garment. So they called his name Esau. And afterward his brother came out, with his hand holding on to Esau's heel. So his name was called Yaakov, and Yitzhak was 60 years old when she bore them. And the boys grew up, and Esau became a man knowing how to hunt, a man of the field, while Yaakov was a complete man dwelling in tents. And Yitzhak loved Esau because he ate of his wild game, but Ribkah loved Yaakov. And Yaakov cooked a stew, and Esau came in from the field and was weary. And Esau said to Yaakov, Please feed me with that same red stew, for I am weary. That is why his name was called Edom. So, starting in verse 23, we see that Yahuwah said to Ribkah that 2 nations were in her womb. I've heard arguments from the black Hebrew Israelites that this right here shows basically that there's 2 races in her womb, that there's 2 completely different people, and that this was basically something that's unheard of. But if this argument is true, if this is something that is unheard of, that it's 2, completely different races in her womb, then how is it that the descendants of one man, Noah, have created all the races on the earth? You see, it's not that these 2 that came out of the womb were 2 separate nations from the womb, but they became 2 separate nations in time. Their argument for this is quite weak, and we'll see that as we go on. I want to point out here that in verse 25, Esau was said to be red all over like a hairy garment. And we'll see that both of his names are aligned with this description of him. Esau means hairy and or rough, and Edom means red or ruddy. Let's look at Esau in Strong's, which is H6215. And we see it's spelled Ayin Shin, Ayin, Shin, and Vav. Esau. It means hairy, and also rough. Where do we see rough? I've seen it here before. Rough, here it is, yeah, Strong's. Rough, as in the sense of handling. When we look at Edom, here in verse 30, which is Strong's H123, we see the spelling of Edom is Aleph, Dalet, Mem. Where else do we see the spelling of Aleph, Dalet, Mem? We'll take a look at that here in just a moment, but first let's look at the definition. Edom equals red. Okay. The root, it's from Strong's H122, which has the same spelling, Aleph, Dalet, Mem, Adom, which means red and ruddy, of man, horse, heifer, garment, water, and lentils. This is from H119, which is the same spelling, Aleph, Dalet, Mem, Adam, to be red and ruddy, or dyed red, or reddened. Where else do we see examples of these words? Okay, aside from Edom, there's several places. The original man. If we go to Bereshith chapter 2, I believe, and verse 7 here, verse 7. And Yahuwah Elohim formed the man out of dust from the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. This is the original man from the beginning that was placed in the Garden of Eden. Let's look at the name of this man. What is man called? H120, Strong's H120. Spelling is Aleph, Dalet, Mem, the same as Edom. It's pronounced Adam, very similar to Edom. They're the same spelling exactly. It means man, mankind, the first man. It's from H119, which is what we just looked at earlier. Edom is from the same H119. It means ruddy, that is, a human being, an individual of the species of mankind. H119, to be red and ruddy. You know, their argument, the Black Hebrew Israelites' argument that Edom represents the white man because he was red and ruddy all over, and they point out that the white man is red and ruddy, not white, but he's actually pinkish or red. They point this out, saying Edom is the white man. And I think their argument is right, that this red and ruddy indicates individuals with ruddy flesh, pinkish, what you would find predominantly in the Caucasian race. They were the Caucasoid. But this is also the first man. Adam was red and ruddy. And not only Adam, as we will see, this same Adam, Aleph, Dalet, Mem, is used in Lamentations 4 verse 7. It says, her Nazarites were brighter than snow and whiter than milk, more ruddy in body than rubies, their cut like sapphire. This is actually a good translation here. Whiter than milk. I mean, if the word milk wasn't there, then we could say by the context that it doesn't necessarily mean white. It could just be dazzling or glaring. But when paired with the word for milk, it is apparent that it is referring to color. They were whiter. They were purer. And ruddy. Here's the word ruddy. That word again. Strong's H119. Adam, to be red. Ruddy. The same word that the black Hebrew Israelites say indicate the white race or the Caucasian race is used here to refer to the children of Israel, the sons of Israel. This is a large body of people being referred to here. I mean, see, Lamentations 4 verse 2, the precious sons of Zion who were weighed against fine gold. This is talking about all the children of Israel here, all the sons. They were ready, okay? Where else do we see this word used? Let's go back. Let's look in Songs of Solomon. Right here, Song of Solomon, which we know is Shlomo, who is the son of King David, one of the greatest kings known in Scripture, the king of Yehuda, or Judah. In chapter 5, in reference to Shlomo, the dark-skinned woman says, "My beloved is dazzling and ruddy, chief among 10,000. His head is refined gold. His locks are wavy, black as a raven. His eyes are like doves by streams of water washed with milk and fitly set. His cheeks are like a bed of spices, raised bed of scented plants. His lips are lilies, dripping, flowing myrrh." It goes on to depict this man, Shlomo, son of David. But if we look at what this word for ruddy is, Strong's H122, spelling Aleph, Dalet, Min. The phonetics Adom means red, ruddy, of man, horse, heifer, garment, water, lentils. Same as we read earlier. So we see the sons of Israel in Lamentations 4 verse 7 being depicted as ruddy. We see Esau or Edom being depicted as red and ruddy. We see the first man being depicted as red and ruddy. We see Shlomo, which is depicted as red and ruddy, and if he's red and ruddy, it's pretty obvious that his father would have been red and ruddy, the king of Israel, the one of the greatest, David, who, most people believe, whether you believe in a Messiah or not, we know the story that the Messiah, Ben Yosef, came through this lineage, and therefore he would have been red and ruddy just like his forefathers. Even though there was some intermixture with the Moabites, which, the Moabites were a very similar people anyway. But let's go on. Okay. In Bereshith, that is Genesis, chapter 25, where we read about Esau, we read that he was red and hairy all over, correct? Let's see. Bereshith 25, verse 25. "And the first came out red all over like a hairy garment, so they called his name Esau." And as we saw earlier, Esau means hairy. Esau, H6215. Esau equals hairy. It could also be depicted as rough, as in handling. The black Hebrew Israelites point out that white men are hairy, and try to say this is referring to them. I would agree with them. But let's look at this. Now consider that Esau was red and hairy. The black Hebrew Israelites say that this is referring to the Caucasian race. And we saw that Shlomo and his father would have been ruddy and hairy. Actually, there's verses that depict King David definitively as ready. We'll have to take a look at that here in a moment. Let's go ahead and look at some of these verses that define that Dawid, the father of Shlomo, was in fact ready. I have the verse highlighted right here already. First Samuel 16 verse 12. This is the passage where Samuel was choosing for Israel a new king to replace Shaul or Saul. So let's start in verse 11 here. This is 1 Samuel 16:11. And Shemuel said to Yeshai, "Are these all the young men?" And he said, "There remains yet the youngest, and see, he is tending the sheep. And Shemuel said to Yeshai, "Send and bring him, for we do not turn round till he comes here." And he sent and brought him in, and he was ruddy, with bright eyes, and good looking. And Yahuwah said, "Arise, anoint him, for this is the one." So Dawid was ready. Let's look at this word in Hebrew. It is Strong's H132, Admoni, spelled Aleph Dalet Mem, Nun Yod. So it's got the Aleph Dalet and the Mem, Adam. Basically, that's, it comes from H119, Adam, and it means red and ruddy. And down below we see some other places that this word is used. It's used here in Genesis or Bereshith 25:25, which is, let's just go ahead and read it. And the first came out red all over, like a hairy garment. So they called his name Esau. And the word Admoni is found right here translated as red. So Esau is Admoni, just like Dawid was Admoni. Another place that we find Dawid depicted or defined as ready is in 1 Samuel 17 verse 42. It says, and when the Philistine looked about and saw Dawid, he despised him, for he was a youth and ruddy and good looking. So here's that word again, ruddy. H132, Admoni, red, ruddy. From H119, Adam, Aleph Dalet Mem, to be red or ready. We see that the first man was Adam, meaning red and ruddy, as in from the earth. But anyway, they say that the white man's hairy, and that, that's why. Well, anyway, let's look at something here. Let's look at the male androgenic hair map of the world, according to American Journal of Physical Anthropology by Stuart W. Hindley, Albert Damon. The areas that are black have the most hair, and as we go down this legend, the amount of body hair is reduced. Here in black is over 70%, 60 to 69% in red, 50 to 59% in purple, 40 to 49% in blue, and so on and so forth. You can see. Now, where do we see the most body hair? All around the Middle East, all around the Mediterranean, North Africa, South Europe, and West Asia. The entire Mediterranean. And this right here, in where we know to be the land of Israel, is all black, very hairy. If we look up in the land of Scandinavia, we also see it's very hairy. And as we go away from these areas, we see the body hair getting less and less and less as we go into Africa and as we go into Asia. So considering This map, which was a study within anthropology, and the body hair concentrations that we find around the Mediterranean, yes, I would agree that Edom was hairy, but I would agree also that all these people were hairy. You see, Esau was the brother of Yaakov, and he would have inherited the same genetic roughly the same genetic admixture from his parents as his brother Yaakov. He would have most definitely received the exact same Y chromosome from his father, Yitzhak. He would have received the exact same mitochondrial DNA from his mother, Ribkah. And he would have received a mixture of their DNA, which is called autosomal DNA, which would match up with his brother Yaakov upwards of 50%. He would have been very, very similar in looks to his brother and would have carried the same Y chromosome and the same mitochondrial DNA. It's very interesting. The DNA that we find around these areas where we see the most body hair, around the Mediterranean here. It's also interesting that the only other area that we find this incredible concentration of body hair is up here in Scandinavia. What does Scandinavia have in common with the Mediterranean? I'll show you. Let's look here at the Y chromosome Adam. This is actually called a haplotree. This is showing the relation of haplogroups to one another. This is the haplotree of the Y chromosome. They do base this on evolution, which is false, Darwinian evolution, but there is some truth to this. You see, the DNA is real. We can prove that DNA is real, and here's how I've been able to prove it to myself. I've sent in my DNA to be tested without giving any information about myself, whether I'm male or female, whether I'm black or white, anything about myself. I gave nothing, but it was able to tell me when it came back my racial characteristics. It was able to tell me that I'm white, where my ancestry came from. It was able to tell me all kinds of things, and the interesting thing is it matched me up with people that I had no idea were related to me. And like there was a guy with completely different last name and did not look anything like me, but in his research he had found his genealogy going back to a man who was the brother of the ancestor that I have in my genealogy. It's amazing. This actually really works. Also, I was having trouble finding an ancestor of mine because there's no records. I can't go back very far and the records just disappear. But I suspected being from a certain lineage because all the evidence was pointing in that way, in that direction. And I saw a man who had been doing genealogical work for this family for like 15 years, and his footprint, was all over the internet concerning this family. And so I contacted this man and told him I really strongly believe that I'm related to you through this such and such ancestor, and I offered to pay for him to do a DNA test if he was willing to do that. I paid for him to get his Y chromosome tested, specifically 37 YSTR markers from FamilyTreeDNA.com. I told him that if we are related through this male ancestor, regardless of the records that we may be lacking, if we match, then we do share the same ancestor. And it came back a 36 out of 37 marker match, meaning that within the last like 6 generations we share a male ancestor. If DNA was a conspiracy or a hoax, none of this would be possible. It's not a hoax. It's real. The information stored in our DNA, our deoxyribonucleic acid, is real. It's there. It's the truth. The falsehood is that they take the things that are true, this genetic information, and they put a twist on it. They presuppose that Darwinian evolution is true, and then they build upon it. This is a logical fallacy. So what we can do is look at this real information and try to use it with the foundation of Scripture, knowing that first and foremost Scripture is correct and that this genetic information is real, but the models they give us is false. Now we can see that adaptation does exist and that we do accumulate mutations, and this is what they show us. This is all they show us, is that mutations are only ever forward evolving. But the truth is, there is a such thing as back mutation or reverse mutation. You can lose mutations, and I believe this is exactly the case of what has happened throughout history. When we were cursed, let's say, like, Canaan was cursed, and when he was cursed, I believe that he did not that in that instant he was cursed, his lineage lost a lot of DNA, lost mutations, de-evolved, if you will. Some of the information I have to back up my hypothesis is just last year we saw this all over the scientific articles here. DNA, our ancient ancestors had lots more. Genetic instructions lost or duplicated during evolution may offer hints to differences between human groups. Let's just read this, the highlight here. Scientists compared DNA from 125 population groups, including humans and related ancient populations. This showed that modern humans have much less DNA than such now extinct groups as the Denisovans and Neanderthals. Some people from Oceania, which is in the purple here, carry duplicated DNA inherited from Denisovans, which we see in black. No Neanderthals nor modern humans carry the duplication indicated by open circles. The black archaic circle represents DNA from a Denisovan and from a Neanderthal. If we go down here to this paragraph, it says, before spreading around the globe, our human ancestors in Africa lost 15.8 million of those DNA base pairs, the researchers found. As people migrated to other continents, more chunks of DNA disappeared. Eckler and colleagues have followed these genetic breadcrumbs. This trail has helped them to map global links between 125 human groups over time. You can find this article here. If you have trouble finding it, you can contact me and I'll show them. I'll link you to it. You can actually find the study down here. Well, if you just look this up, you can find the actual peer-reviewed studies on this. This is amazing because it shows de-evolution rather than evolution. And I believe that there's a mixture of both going on. We do have adaptations or a type of evolution, but we also have de-evolution going on at the same time, which makes up for a numerous amount of Y-DNA haplogroups. And sometimes without this knowledge of evolution and de-evolution going on at the same time, it's really difficult to make sense out of all these haplogroups in combination with what we know from Scripture. With knowledge of de-evolution and evolution happening at the same time, de-evolution being through curses and creation, special creation, we can see how it does work with Scripture. And so with that said, let's go back to the Y haplotree that I had shown you earlier, and let's talk about it a little bit. Alright, so they show this tree of evolution from the man with the least amount of mutations, going down to the men with the most mutations. Now, I don't agree with the layout of this tree. I believe, from my research, that there was de-evolution from this group, haplogroup F. I believe that prior to this tree is mankind that had been cursed and lost many of these mutations. Going down from this tree, I believe we see adaptation, evolution, and accruing of more mutations. And we see that from haplogroup F, there are relations to, like for instance, haplogroups I and haplogroup J. They are related through their ancestor, depicted here as IJ, who goes back to their ancient ancestor F. You see how it goes down the tree here. So IJ, our haplogroup I and J, are more closely related through their ancestor, haplogroup IJ, than they are haplogroup R, for instance. Haplogroup R and haplogroup Q are more related through their ancestor P, which goes back to K. We also see that haplogroup O down here and N is related to R and Q through their ancestor K. All these groups over here down from K are more closely related than they are to haplogroup I and J. So why am I telling you this? What does this all mean? Let's look over here at this map, this Y-DNA human migration map. This map is depicting where the paternal tribes of peoples around the world were located prior to the colonization of America. And we see that haplogroup Q, Q3 in particular, is over here in the Americas, and that it came from East Asia, and it goes back to this point right here. R also comes from this point. This is haplogroup P, this point, because we know from P comes R and Q, as we saw here in the haplo tree. Haplogroup P, and from P we have Q and R. Okay? So here's P. This is the point right here in East Central Asia. And from there we have Q going over to Northeast Asia, and then across the Bering Strait over into the Americas. And this is the Y chromosomal haplogroup of your especially Eastern Native Americans. We also find, amazingly, a haplogroup R that came over a long time ago prior to the colonization of Americas over here in Northeast America. It was an older group prior to the creation of R1b and R1a. I think it's just R1 that came over here. But we can see the relation of haplogroup R and haplogroup Q. They are the same peoples. And they went to the north, and they came from K. K is a super group. I mean, from K comes forth N, from K comes forth R and Q, from K comes forth O. So many different haplogroups. And it is my belief that this fits with what we know about the man Japeth. Japeth was the son of Noah, and his descendants inherited quite a bit of land. And I believe that, now, okay, what I wanted to show you here before I get off track is that his descendants went up here into North Asia, like N. Now, N populated this area to the east of Scandinavia, And we know that this area east of Scandinavia is like an Asiatic, Mongoloid-ish type people. And we know that all over Northeast Asia is a Mongoloid type people, bone structurally Mongoloid, that the natives to the Americas are a Mongoloid bone structure people, and all these descendants of K are predominantly Mongoloid, but we also find Caucasoid descendants of K over here in West Europe, which is R1b, and it is my hypothesis that the reason we see Caucasoid features in the majority of R1b people is through admixture with the descendants of Shem, whom I believe to be either haplogroup F, or well, no, not haplogroup F, that's right. I believed it to be haplogroup IJ, as we see right here, which was a descendant of F. I would believe that Noah was probably haplogroup F. So, or possibly, even Noah's ancestors. So, I believe it is my hypothesis that I and J are the descendants of Shem, the Shemites, and the areas that we see them populating is the Middle East here. And then we see that J and J1 populated the southern parts of Europe and the northern parts of North Africa. And that is the Mediterranean, as we saw on the body hair map, the androgenic body hair map. And we also see that they populated Scandinavia, I1, right here in Scandinavia. We also see that this path they took was through Western Europe, and we also find I2 throughout Central Europe here. And we find I1 throughout Central Europe. This is where R1b crosses paths with the Shemites. We see that the Shemites move north into Scandinavia, and the Japhethites moved west from their home location here in East Central Asia and crossed paths. See, right here is where R1b and I1 intersect. And not only I1, but J2 and some J1 and I2. But what it shows is that there was intermixture, admixture here with the Shemites and the Japhethites. And through just some admixture, we see that we have Japhethites here, which is the majority of the Y chromosomes that we find in Western Europe, upwards of 80% in places like Ireland and Scotland, and in West Europe here, like France, we see it up to 60% and stuff. But it is my hypothesis that R1b is actually a descendant of Japeth, but has the Caucasoid features unlike their relatives over here in East Asia because of admixture or intermixture with the Shemite lines. Now, going back to the body hair map, we see Scandinavia extremely hairy. We see the Mediterranean extremely hairy. Going back to the genetic map here, we see that Scandinavia is Shemite, I1 haplogroup. We see that the Mediterranean is Shemite, J1 and J2. The same areas that we found the high proportion of body hair in is the same areas that we find the Shemitic lineages, haplogroups I and haplogroups J. Going over here to this little map that I pulled up, we find the map of the Roman Empire. We find that this empire was all throughout the Mediterranean, the same areas that we find all this body hair, the same areas that we find haplogroup J1 and J2, and the same areas that we find haplogroup I. And I just wanted to show you this map of the Y haplogroup J2 and look at how heavy the population of J2 is in this area of the Mediterranean. Now, something that I want to point out here is skull structure. The Caucasian race And you can look this up in many areas, but to keep things brief, we'll look at Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is good at briefly depicting or explaining a subject. And if we want to look into more depth, we can look at some of their references, or we can go to books on anthropology by men like John Baker or Carlton Kuhn, or we can even look at more ancient books on anthropology from men like Blumenbach, and so on and so forth. But for the sake of brevity, let's look here. The Caucasian race, also Caucasoid or occasionally Europid, is a taxon historically used to describe the physical or biological type of some or all of the populations of Europe, North Africa, the Horn of Africa, Western Asia, Central Asia, and South Asia. The term has been used in biological anthropology for many people from these regions without regard necessarily to skin tone. You see, it doesn't have to do with skin tone, it has to do with skull structure. The term originally came from this skull that they found in the Caucasus Mountains. See, the Georgian skull Blumenbach discovered in 1795, which he used to hypothesize origination of Europeans from the Caucasus. Okay, so, and this man, Blumenbach, is actually a man that I've read quite a bit about recently in the book by John Baker called Race, published in 1974. And this man, Blumenbach, as you can see, the date here given in reference to him is 1795. He was an anthropologist from quite a while back, whom believed that humans actually, the races or the taxon, ethnic taxon of humans was created through de-evolution, a process of de-evolution rather than evolution. And I agree with this man that for the most part that is true, although there is some element of adaptation and or evolution. So if you want to take your time and read through this and look into the books about it, you'll see the Caucasoid race is Caucasoid because of skull structure and not because of color. There are black Caucasoids, there are white Caucasoids, they're red and yellow. The color really doesn't matter. There is some, of course, ties to color and the Caucasoid race, just because you're not going to find certain shades of black in the Caucasoid race. You're not going to find certain shades of yellow perhaps in the Caucasoid race, but you'd be surprised the colors that you do find within them. Let's look here at where we find, here, let's take a look at these pictures. Pictures of the Caucasoid race. Here we have one called Hamitic, a Hamitic Caucasoid. Look at how dark this man is, but you'll notice his skull structure. He looks like a white man, what you would call a white man. He has a Caucasian face. The shape of his head, the shape of his nose, the shape of his lips, the shape of his brow ridge, but he's very dark. Okay? Here's a Nordic Caucasian. Here's an Aryan Caucasian, Hindu. Now, let's take a look down here at this map of the races. And it is my belief that there are three main races: Caucasoid race, a Negroid race, and a Mongoloid race. If you look at the Caucasoid race, we see that there's the Aryans, the Semitic, and the Hamitic. And the areas that we find them is the same areas that we find the large proportion of body hair. It's also the same areas that we find haplogroup J and haplogroup I. You see this blue area here. Excuse me, I'm having technical difficulties. Alright, sorry for that technical difficulty. I'm going to get back to where we were here, or try. I believe I was showing how the Caucasoid race is depicted here in this map that we were taking a look at. and a look at the area that it is showing the Caucasoid race, the same area that we found the large amounts of body hair in the androgenic map here in Scandinavia, and here throughout the Mediterranean. And look here, we see intermixture with whom I believe to be the descendants of Japeth, whom I believe to be the Mongoloids. Now, if you look at all these, if we look at all these tools that we have, this tool here being the depiction of the three races, Caucasoid right here around the Mediterranean and parts of Scandinavia, Mongoloid here in East and Central and North and even parts of Southern Asia, and Negroid, which we see down here in Africa, South Africa, Central Africa, and so on and so forth. We look at this other tool that we have, the androgenic hair map of the world, and we look at DNA and where these haplogroups have spread around the world, we start to see the big picture. The big picture being that these haplogroups that we find in these areas of the Caucasoid race, that this androgenic hair map that we find in the same areas, that all these things are pointing to one thing, and that is that the Caucasoids, this Caucasoid facial structure or bone structure, wherever I can find this at here, there it is, that this Caucasoid people, Caucasoid bone structure, is none other than the descendants of Shem, the Shemitic people. That this Mongoloid people is none other than the descendants of Japeth, and that this Negroid people, this Negroid race, is the descendants of Ham. This fits with the history that we have of where these people dwelt. I mean, we know good and well that the descendants of Shem populated the Middle East, predominantly Northern Africa and Southern Europe, and we know that Yapeth went north for the most part, and that Shem dwelt in the tents of Yapeth. Well, here we see they're interlapping. We see that Shem actually went up here into Scandinavia, which would have been the land of Yapeth, and dwelt in his tents, like we saw in the body hair. Why is there, we see that only here in around the Mediterranean is predominantly where we see the high amounts of body hair, but then all of a sudden there's this black up here in Scandinavia. How does that even make sense? It's because he's dwelling in the tents of Shem. Okay. And while we're at it, let's just take another look at another map, just because it might help people to see and understand the spread of these haplogroups. It's really showing the exact same spread that we saw in this other map here, except for its color coding areas. See, Scandinavia was filled by haplogroup I1, and we see haplogroup I1 and I2 coming through Europe. Now, this is the same thing that we saw going on earlier, and just for a reminder, haplogroup I and haplogroup J are related to each other through their ancestor IJ. And so we see the areas that they populated here around the north, around North Africa, here through Southern Europe, all in the Middle East, and then up in Scandinavia. Going back to my notes here, I'm just going to look through these. I had noted that Esau and Yaakov would have the same Y chromosome. I'm pretty sure that everybody should understand that, but just in case you don't, let's just look up the Y chromosome. And while I'm pulling this up, I just want to point out something that I've already spoken on. when I was doing my genealogy, I found, relation to people that had different last names that had, there'd be no way I would ever be able to find out that they were related to me except through this Y chromosome. The Y chromosome is a sex chromosome. The X and Y is your sex chromosomes. You get your X if you're a man from your mom. You get your Y from your father. It's the paternal line. The Y chromosome is tied strictly to the paternal line. These sex chromosomes are called non-recombinant DNA, and the reason being they do not recombine with the other sex, the other partner. When my mother and father came together, they passed on DNA to me, and most of their DNA on these 22 chromosomes recombine with one another to create a unique individual. That's me. But the DNA that does not recombine is the Y chromosome and the X chromosome. So what this does for us is allow us to trace the migration of peoples, ancient ancestry, our tribe, and things like this through this Y chromosome, because it rarely ever changes, and when it does, it is very, very minute in change. It's very infrequent also. There are SNPs, which are single nucleotide polymorphisms, and then there are STR markers, which are short tandem repeats. Within the STR markers, you have certain markers that are fast mutating, and then you have some that are very slow mutating, and then SNPs are even slower and are better for defining tribes, if you will. And these men that I have found myself related to have, one or two of those fast mutating short tandem repeats or STR markers different from me. Out of 67, the one man had 2 that were different than me. But our SNP, single nucleotide polymorphism grouping, is exactly the same, and we share a common ancestor back in the early 1700s. So that goes to show how little they change.
I'm not gonna bother.
So with that said, let's take a look at what the .gov website says here about the Y chromosome and see if it explains what I just told you. Alright, what is the Y chromosome? The Y chromosome is one of the 2 sex chromosomes in humans. The other is the X chromosome. The sex chromosomes form one of the 23 pairs of human chromosomes in each cell. The Y chromosome spans more than 59 million building blocks of DNA, also known as base pairs, and represents almost 2% of the total DNA in cells. This is exactly what I just got done explaining to you. Each person normally has 1 pair of sex chromosomes in each cell. The Y chromosome is present in males who have 1 X and 1 Y chromosome, while females have 2 X chromosomes. Identifying genes on each chromosome in an active area of genetic research. Because researchers use different approaches to predict the number of genes on each chromosome, the estimated number of genes varies. The Y chromosome likely contains 50 to 60 genes that provide instruction for making proteins. Because only males have the Y chromosome, the genes on this chromosome tend to be involved in male sex determination and development. Sex is determined by the SRY gene, which is responsible for the development of a fetus into a male. Other genes on the Y chromosome are important for male fertility. Many genes are unique to the Y chromosome, but genes in areas known as pseudo-autosomal regions are present in both sex chromosomes. As a result, men and women each have 2 functional copies of these genes. Many genes in the pseudo-autosomal regions are essential for normal development. Let's see what Wikipedia has to say. Like I said, Wikipedia is good for taking complicated information and making it short. And you can look into this more if you want later. The Y chromosome is one of 2 sex chromosomes in mammals, including humans, and many other animals. The other is the X chromosome. Y is the sex-determining chromosome in many species, since it is since it is the presence or absence of Y that determines male or female sex of offspring produced in sexual reproduction. In mammals, the Y chromosome contains the gene SRY, which triggers testes development. Let's go on and see some more information. If we scroll down here in Wikipedia, we can read here that the human Y chromosome is normally unable to recombine with the X chromosome except for small pieces of pseudo-autosomal regions at the telomeres, which comprise about 5% of the chromosome's length. These regions are relics of ancient homology between X and Y chromosomes. The bulk of the Y chromosome which does not recombine is called the NRY, or non-recombining region of the Y chromosome. It is the SNPs, that is single nucleotide polymorphism, in this region that are used to trace direct paternal ancestral lines. So as we see, the Y chromosome is what determines your sex, being male. If you have it, you're male. If you don't, you're female. It is only passed on father to son, and it does not recombine with the X chromosome from the mother. It does not recombine with any of her DNA except for a very small portion, and it is basically unchanging. This is what determines your tribe. This is what determines your people, and your father has the same Y chromosome as you, your great-grandfather, your great-great-great-great-grandfather. So with that being said, going back here to my notes that I had, Esau and Jacob will have the same Y chromosome. And so now that we know how the Y chromosome works, that it is passed on father to son, only men carry it, and that it does not recombine with the mother's DNA, we know for certain that Esau and Jacob would have the exact same Y chromosome. And the black Hebrew Israelites say that the white man is Esau and that the black man is Jacob. These men were brothers. They would have shared the exact same Y chromosome, but what we see, what is reality, is that the majority of white men do not share the exact same Y chromosome with black men. Black men are predominantly haplogroup E1B1A, and white men are predominantly haplogroup R1B or R1A, and we also find haplogroup I and haplogroup J in white men, but we very, very rarely find haplogroup E1B1A or any of the E haplogroups. So what that means is that their hypothesis that Esau is the white man and that Jacob is the black man is unfounded and ridiculous. As of October 8th, 2015, we have an ancient Ethiopian genome revealing extensive Eurasian admixture throughout the African continent, as seen here on science.sciencemag.org. This study can be purchased. It's not free, but there are communities of people who have purchased this information and have made it available to me. We will take a look at that shortly. I will read the abstract here. Abstract. Characterizing genetic diversity in Africa is a crucial step for most analyses, reconstructing the evolutionary history of anatomically modern humans. However, historic migrations from Eurasia into Africa have affected many contemporary populations, confounding inferences. Here we present a 12.5 times coverage ancient genome of an Ethiopian male named Mota, who lived approximately 4,500 years ago. We use this genome to demonstrate that Eurasian backflow into Africa came from a population closely related to early Neolithic farmers who had colonized Europe 4,000 years earlier. The extent of this backflow was much greater than previously reported, reaching all the way to Central, West, and Southern Africa, affecting even populations such as Yoruba and Mbuti, previously thought to be relatively unadmixed, who harbor 6 to 7% Eurasian ancestry. So this shows that there is quite a bit of admixture from the Middle East or also known as Eurasia, with the African peoples. So this right here would be seemingly hopeful to the black Hebrew Israelites, who would see this information and say, see, we told you so. We are from the Middle East. Our people came here from the Middle East and have been here. That's why you see this admixture. So it is important that we analyze this man's DNA so that we can learn the truth. We know via the mutations, the genetic mutations that this man has, that he lived prior to the migration of the Eurasian people into Africa, such as when the Israelites went into Mitsrayim and was under the pharaohs in slavery. This man lived prior to that because of the genetic mutations he has, and the dating method for that is quite accurate. And we know that this man, according to the study here, or the information given here about this study, rather, on Reuters.com, as you can see, ancient Ethiopian man's genome illuminates ancestry of Africans. Here we find that the man had dark skin, brown eyes, and genetic adaptations for living at high altitudes. We would know this because the genome gives us this kind of information. Moda is genetically very similar to current inhabitants of the Ethiopian highlands and eastern Africa. He had no trace of Eurasian ancestry, enabling the researchers to use his genome to better understand the Eurasian genetic component now seen in modern Africans. They used his genome to determine there was a large migration of West Eurasians into Africa around 3,500 to 4,000 years ago, University of Cambridge geneticist Marcos Gallego Lorente said. So, if you look here, keep on going, yeah, right here. By comparing the ancient genome to DNA from modern Africans, the researchers showed today's East Africans have up to 45% Eurasian ancestry from this ancient migration, and that populations in all corners of Africa have at least 6% of their genome arising from the Eurasian migration. Wow. So this man has no Eurasian component in his DNA, but every single African on this African continent nowadays has 6% or more Eurasian DNA. So this really means that this man is an original inhabitant of Ethiopia. He lived there before any admixture from outside of Africa. We know from Scripture where the descendants of Ham through his son Cush dwelt. We know where his land was. His land was Ethiopia. So this was a Cushite, this man, Mota. So it's important for us to find what his Y chromosome was so that we know whether or not the Hebrew Israelite claims are true. Because if this man's Y chromosome is like haplogroup J, or J1, J2, or R1b, or anything, then we'll know that the Hamites are another lineage other than what the Hebrew Israelites are. Because the black Hebrew Israelites are haplogroup E1B1A. That's the DNA that they claim to be the tribe of Yehuda. So this man, Mota, who is an original Cushite, if his Y chromosome is haplogroup J1 or haplogroup J2 or something like that, then their claims might be legitimate. But if this man, Mota, if his haplogroup is, his Y-DNA haplogroup is E1B1A, and we know that he's an original inhabitant of Ethiopia, that he's an original Cushite without any admixture, then this will falsify the claims of the Hebrew Israelites. So let's find out what his Y chromosome actually is. If we go over here to Athrogenica, which is a community of genetics and anthropology discussion, it's a discussion forum, It's a community of people that study this stuff, and they invest money in studying this stuff, and this is where I'm able to get this free information from. Scrolling down here, this person is giving us information about Mota, and it reveals that the mitochondrial haplogroup is L3. It reveals that this man's Y DNA haplogroup is E1B1. So this means that the Cushite lineage is Y DNA haplogroup E1B1. Furthermore, with this knowledge that we have about this man's DNA, about him being an original inhabitant of Ethiopia, an original Cushite, not having any Eurasian genetic admixture, and seeing that based on this man's pure Ethiopian DNA, and being able to compare it to modern African DNA and finding the difference is the Eurasian component, we find that around the Horn of Africa we have up to or upwards of 25% Eurasian admixture, and the farther east we go in the northern parts of Africa, the higher that percentage goes, all the way up to 45% Eurasian ancestry in the East Africans. What this shows is that the Caucasoid features that we find in the North Africans today are there due to this Eurasian component, this Eurasian migration from the early Neolithic farmers going into Africa. What it shows is that the original Ethiopian Cushite was a pure Negroid, and that this Eurasian component comes from the Middle Eastern farmers. This is why as you go farther away from the Middle East, and the percentage of Eurasian admixture drops down to 4, 5, 6%, 7%. The farther away you get from it, and the more African the DNA, the more pure African the DNA rather, and the less Middle Eastern Eurasian DNA you have, the more Negroid the features become. This is why we find Caucasoids all around the northern parts of Africa. Obviously, that's why we find Caucasoids in the Middle East, because the original Caucasoid comes from the Middle East. We find Caucasoids around the Mediterranean because we have these same Middle Eastern Neolithic farmers, as they're known, migrating into the southern parts of Europe throughout history. We know the Israelites went into captivity in Assyria, and we know that Dan, the tribe of Dan, they did business with the Greeks, and they settled areas of Greece, and we know in the dispersion they went into southern Europe, and the Roman Empire scattered them throughout their empire, which was southern Europe and North Africa also. So of course we're going to have Caucasoids there. All this stuff just lines up perfectly. Where you see Caucasoid features, you see Semitic DNA. Where you see Caucasoid features, you see the Neolithic farmers having history of being scattered to these areas. So, with this knowledge, I would like to know, are there actually any true black Hebrew Israelites? And the answer is yes. Here we read about the Limba people. The Limba, also Warimba, or I'm not even going to try to pronounce this, are a southern African ethnicity found in Zimbabwe and South Africa, with smaller, little-known branches in Mozambique and Malawi. According to Tudor Parfit, professor of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, in 2002 they numbered an estimated 50,000. They speak the Bantu languages spoken by their geographic neighbors and resemble them physically, but they have some religious practices and beliefs similar to those in Judaism and Islam, which they claim were transmitted by oral tradition. The name Limba may originate in Chalimba, a Swahili word for turbans worn by some Bantu peoples, or Limbi, a Bantu word meaning non-African or respected foreigner. Magdel Leroux says that the name Varimba may be translated as the people who refuse, probably in the context of not eating with others, according to one of her interviewees. Since the late 20th century, there has been increased media and scholarly attention to the Rimba's claim of common descent to the Jewish people. Genetic Y-DNA analyses in the 2000s have established a particular Middle Eastern origin for a portion of the male Limba population. Both Arabs and Jews share this DNA, but the Cohen modal haplotype, an indicator of Jewish ancestry, has been found among the males of one leadership clan at rates even higher than in the general Jewish population. Okay, with that, let's go to an actual study done on these people. In the South African Medical Journal, Limba Origins Revisited, tracing the ancestry of Y chromosomes in South African and Zimbabwean Limba. Background. Let's just go to the objective here. The objective: to revisit the question concerning genetic affinities between the Limba and Jews. Methods: Y chromosome variation was examined in 2 Limba groups, one from South Africa, and for the first time a group from Zimbabwe, the Rimba, to reevaluate the previously reported Jewish link. Results: a sample of 261 males, 76 Limba, 54 Rimba, 43 Vinda, and 88 South African Jews was initially analyzed for 16 biallelic and 6 short tandem repeats that resulted in the resolution of 102 STR haplotypes distributed across 13 haplogroups. The non-African component in the Limba and Rimba was estimated to be 73.7% and 79.6% respectively. That's quite a bit of non-African DNA. In addition, a subset of 91 individuals, 35 Limba, 24 Rimba, and 32 South African Jews with haplogroup J were resolved further using 6 additional biallelic markers and 12 STRs to screen for the extended Cohen modal haplotype. Although 24 individuals, 10 Limba, and 14 South African Jews were identified as having the original Cohen modal haplotype, only one South African Jew harbored the extended Cohen modal haplotype. Conclusions: while it was not possible to trace unequivocally the origins of the non-African Y chromosomes in the Limba and Rimba, this study does not support the earlier claims of their Jewish genetic heritage. Of course, they're not going to support these African genetic claims. My opinion is that they are true Israelites, and that these true Black Hebrew Israelites do have a genetic claim, and that they are the descendants of Abraham, and that they are the descendants of Yitzhak and Yaakov, and that the reason that they're not going to be accepted is because modern Judaism says that you have to be, basically you're Jewish based on your mother, not your father. And we know from Scripture that it is your father's lineage that determines your tribe. And these people here do have the DNA that joins them, that connects them through their father's lineage to the Jewish people, or the Israelite people, that is. And so, anyway, with that said, let's look at the haplogroup distribution among these people. Let me zoom in on this here. Here we see the Limba, the Rimba, the Vinda, and the South African Jews. Over here on the left, we see all the haplogroups. We have a chart A and we have a chart B. If we look at A, or figure A, it is phylogeny and distribution of Y chromosome haplogroups defined by the 16 biallelic markers used in this study. If we look at figure B, we have the phylogeny showing the finer resolution of haplogroup J chromosomes using 6 single nucleotide polymorphisms, and the number of individuals from a subset of Limba, Rimba, and Jewish samples with these subhaplogroups. That's what we just read earlier above, right up here, that they would take 35 of these Rimba, 35 of the Limba, 24 of the Rimba, and 32 of the South African Jews with haplogroup J, and resolve further using 6 additional biallelic markers. So this is a subset that we see down here that they used to go after a higher resolution in the DNA. And so what do we see? We see that there's haplogroup E among these people. Of course, they're in Africa and they're mixing with the African natives. And we saw earlier that E1b was native to Africa prior to the Eurasian admixture. So yes, we're going to see some of that in these people. Like here in the Limba, we see 16 of E-M2. That's the highest amount you see, is the E-M2. And in the Rimba, you only see 11 of these. But if we go down here to the J haplogroup, JM304, which is just haplogroup J, with not J1 or J2, it's just haplogroup J, we have 30 in the Rimba, and we have 5, or we have 30 in the Limba, and we have 5 in the Rimba, and we have 20 in the South African Jews. In the J2, the Limba have 4, and the Rimba have 23, and the South African Jews have 16. If we go down to the higher resolution figures, we find that the Limba have 20 in haplogroup J-P58, which is the Cohen-Modal haplotype, and in J1 we have 10, and in J2 or J-M12 we have 5. In the Rimba we have 3 haplogroup J1, which is defined by the mutation JM267, and in JM-410, which is also downstream of haplogroup J2, we have 10 of the Rimba. And we also have 11 Rimba in J-M12. What I'm showing here is that there is quite a bit of haplogroups J1 and J2 in these black Hebrew Israelites. I will call them black Hebrew Israelites confidently, because they are. Their DNA comes from the Middle East and matches the Y chromosomes of the people that we would traditionally know as Jews, in particular those with Kohanim ancestry, upwards of 50% across the Ashkenazi, the Sephardic, and the Yemenite or Mizrahim Jews. Now, going back to the Wikipedia article on the Limba tribe, under the section DNA testing, we read that a subsequent study in 2000 found that a substantial number of Limba men carry a particular haplotype of the Y chromosome known as the Cohen modal haplotype, as well as a haplogroup of Y DNA, haplogroup J, found among some Jews, but also in other populations across the Middle East and Arabia. The genetic studies have found no Semitic female contribution to the Limba gene pool. This indicates that Israelite men migrated to Africa in ancient times and took wives from among the local people while settling in new communities. And what this does, this explains to us the reason why these black Hebrew Israelites, the true black Hebrew Israelites, would have the Y chromosomes of men coming from the Middle East, but yet have the Negroid bone structure that they do. Because if a Middle Eastern man with a Caucasoid bone structure married a black Negroid woman and had children, his sons would be mixed. Now, if his mixed sons took a Negroid local wife and mixed even further, his sons would become so mixed that they would look nearly identical to the local population. And after only a few generations, they would resemble the locals while still being the direct paternal descendants of these Arabian type people that came from the Middle East. So, with that said, and with the things that we have learned here today, let's take a look at a short little video clip, and let's pay attention to what we find around minute marker 1 and 20 seconds. And we will start at the beginning.
On the border of Black Africa, as the Nubian drummers played into the night, I was reminded of my work 20 years before with a southern African tribe called the Lemba. As far back as anybody could recall, the Lemba had claimed to be Jewish, effectively a lost tribe of Israel.
As you can see,
their oral
they
tradition
have
said they were led out of the Holy
Negroid
Land
features
by priests at the time of the Babylonian invasion, and that they'd taken a sacred object they called the Ngoma Ngundu with them. I believe that the Lemba and the Ngoma hold the key to understanding what happened to the Ark of the Covenant. When I first arrived in Africa in the late 1980s, I hadn't been searching for the Ark at all. I'd come here purely to investigate Lemba claims that their ancestors were Jews who'd once lived somewhere to the north in a place they knew as Senna.
This is in Yemen.
Today, the Lemba live either side of the Limpopo River in modern-day South Africa and Zimbabwe. When I first came here, there were still Lemba elders alive who would refer to their people as the white men who came from Senna. There were still Lemba elders alive who would refer to their people as the white men who came from Senna. The elders alive who would refer to their people as the white men who came from Senna.
Okay, I'll stop there. So as we can see, these people have the oral tradition that their forefathers came from the white men who came from Senna. Let's take a look at where Senna is. Senna is here in Yemen, south of Saudi Arabia. This is also where we found the Caucasoid race. Most Africans and most people around the world consider those with the Caucasoid facial features and bone structure as white men, even though there are many variations of skin tone among the Caucasoids. And in my experience talking to Africans, anybody that is of much lighter complexion than they are is a white man. So even a tawny or olive-complected Middle Eastern man to them would be a white man. So this just all fits together perfect with the things I have been showing you here today, and I thought that you should take a look at the limba, at the rimba, at their Y chromosomes, and at their oral traditions that they came from these white men from the Middle East. So, considering the things that we have learned here today, especially about the ancient Ethiopian genome and the Y-DNA haplogroup of this ancient Ethiopian being E1B1, the claims that the black Hebrew Israelites have that they themselves are the ancient Israelites, that they are the descendants of Israel through his son Judah, and that the Africans are Hamites, is absurd. I mean, we saw that ancient Cushite DNA is E1B1, yet they claim, as African Americans being E1B1A haplogroup, that they are Israelites, but that the Africans that still live in Africa, who are not African American, but are just Africans that never left Africa, that they are Hamites, even though they share the exact same Y chromosome. Do you see the fallacy in their arguments? Their DNA reveals that they share the exact same paternal ancestors, both the African American or the American Negro and the modern day inhabitants of Africa have the same paternal ancestors as shown through the Y chromosome. And we see that this Y chromosome of theirs has been in Africa prior to the Eurasian admixture, and that they are the original Cushites, that they are Hamites. Yet they make these absurd claims that they, the American Negro, are Shemitic, and that their brothers, the modern day Africans, are Hamitic. The reason why they look different than modern day Africans, and I am speaking about the American Negro, the reason why the American Negro looks different than the modern day African is due to their genetic admixture with the colonial Americans. You see, most of your modern African Americans have a small amount of European DNA through admixture with the white European Caucasian people. That's why they are lighter skinned than their African brothers, and this does not make them a different people. This does not make them Middle Eastern, and their brothers are the African people. They are the Hamites. All the information shows this. And what's even more ridiculous is their claims that the black Americans are the tribe of Judah. The West Indians is the tribe of Benjamin. The Haitians is the tribe of Levi. The Dominicans is the tribe of Simeon. The Guatemalans and the Panamanians are Zebulun. The Puerto Ricans are Ephraim. The Cubans are Manasseh. The Native American Indians is Gad. The Seminole Indians is Reuben. The Colombians and Uruguayans is Asher. The Argentinians and Chileans is Naphtali. And the Mexicans is Issachar. This is really funny because we know that the tribe, what determines your tribe is your father's Y chromosome, his paternal lineage. That is your tribal people. So Israel had a certain Y chromosome, and all his sons had his Y chromosome, and all his descendants would have had his Y chromosome, and over time would have accrued, a little bit more mutations over the last couple thousand years, but they would have been few in number. But the black Americans, the American Negro that was purchased in the slave trade, for the most part, is haplogroup E1B1A, and we find all kinds of wildly varying Y chromosomes among these people here that they have listed as the different tribes of Israel, such as, the Mexicans being tribe of Issachar. Are you kidding me? I mean, the Mexicans are this Babylonian, melting pot, basically. You have haplogroup R1b, you have haplogroup J2, J1, haplogroup C, I think there's haplogroup E, and just all kinds of different mixtures among them. So how can you just say, oh, they're the Mexicans, all of them, yeah, they're all Issachar? They have all kinds of different paternal lineages, and almost none of them equal that of the black American. I mean, how can you come up with these ridiculous conclusions? They're unfounded, but they say these things. They just throw them out there and people buy into it without studying it or researching any of it. What it is a color thing. They're racist. The black Hebrew Israelites are pure racist, and it's racism against the white man, because you can see the people that they have picked here as being their brothers is people of color, or what they would call people of color. But we also see not just the Y chromosomal differences among all these people here that they have picked out as different tribes of Israel. We see huge variation in the skull and bone structure, which is what really determines race, not color. Color is not what determines race. It's your genes that make your race. Not, and yes, there are genes associated with color, but there are many more genes associated with these skull structures. And as we have seen, there's a Caucasoid skull structure, but there's also Mongoloid and a Negroid. And the black Americans have a Negroid skull structure, but the Indians, the Hindu Indians, have a Caucasoid skull structure. But then the Mexicans have a mixture of Caucasoid and, in some places, tending more towards, or starting to tend towards Negroid, and in other areas, tending towards Mongoloid. They're kind of, because there's so many mixtures of ancestry in Mexico, they're mixed up quite a bit, but overall you see more Caucasoid in the Mexicans. And then you look at the North American native, the natives, Native Americans, they're Mongoloid. So they're taking here what they would call people of color from all different skull structures, all three different races of people, and saying, that all these different people are descendants through one man and their brother, and the only reason they're doing this is because these are people of color. They're doing this for their hatred of white man, and whether they realize it or not. And you can look into all these different groups of people, find out what their Y chromosomes are and what their percentages are. Learn a little bit more about the Y chromosome if you don't believe what I have shown you here, and see for yourself that these people that they've listed here as all being descendants of Israel have no relation to each other through the paternal lineage, and therefore these claims are false. And I will probably make another video in the future going into more detail about this, showing in detail the Y chromosomes of these groups that they have listed here and the percentages that they are in. And I might even go into more detail about the Y chromosome and the migration paths of these people. But for now, I'm going to stop with this, with the information that I have given here today. I hope that you have learned something and take something from this. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to contact me. leave me a comment or message me here on YouTube. Thank you for watching.